Welcome back, guys. When Konrad Curze first met the Emperor on his homeworld of Nostramo, the Emperor was accompanied by Rogal Dorn, Lorgar Aurelian, Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim, and Curze saw the future of each one of them. Let's see what happened. Konrad Curze was from the start a dark and haunted figure, obsessed by death and judgment, and unshakable in his belief in the fundamental fallibility of humanity and the agency of fear as the only true means of controlling mankind's failings. The Primarch Konrad Curze's earliest memory was of descending from the heavens in a crackling ball of light to the night-shrouded planet of Nostramo, his gestation capsule cruelly ripped through the warp from distant Terra by the machinations of the Chaos Gods, impacted on the dense cityscape of the planet's largest hive city, Nostramo Quintus, smashing through countless levels of urban debris and moldering architecture, through the planet's crust and into its geosphere before finally coming to a halt near the highly unstable liquid core of the planet. Nostramo was a human-settled world that circled a dying sun, whose light now only barely reached the world, leaving it trapped in perpetual darkness. The crust of Nostramo bore high quantities of the strategic mineral adamantium, which provided the basis of the planet's immense mining and refining industries and supported the economies of its large hive cities. Unlike many of the other Primarchs, Konrad Curze was not taken in by any family and was left to raise himself in the vast underhive of Nostramo Quintus. He spent his early life surviving off his wits and determination, feeding himself by hunting the feral animals that roamed through the vast hive city. He was continually plagued by visions of the darkest possible future, horrifyingly potent waking dreams that would curse him throughout his life. Uniquely among all the Primarchs, Curze grew up completely alone, surviving only thanks to his wits, ruthlessness, and courage as a feral child in the underhives of Nostramo Quintus. As a lone young boy, feral and wary, Curze shivered in the shadows of broken buildings and atop roofs, living as a scavenger and slaying any who sought to prey upon him, for even as an infant he was possessed of frightful strength and tireless will, married to a superhuman and watchful intelligence. Ever in the dark, isolated and silent, he was more nightmare than demigod. He killed to survive, and discovered that he was not like those that he killed. They were weak and slow by comparison, and fell easily to his hands and fists and teeth. He ate the flesh of vermin to survive, and when that was not enough, he ate the dead. In his cauldron of sin he learned, his mind taking the whispers of thoughts from the flesh he ate, leeching speech and the arts of murder from those he watched. He soaked up all the darkness could teach him, assimilating it as only the mind of a transhuman Primarch could. But the product of this savage tutelage was not a simple murderer or beast. Perhaps something of the Emperor's greater purpose whispered to Curze. He could have become like the rest of Nostramo, a killer and a criminal. Given his nature, who can doubt that he would have risen to be the corrupt king of all he surveyed? But he did not. Instead, the boy who had grown up amongst the vermin and on the flesh of the dead chose to change the world by bringing it justice. He began by killing those who crossed his path. Murderers and street thugs began to vanish, then whole gangs. A name began to follow his deeds, a name that he heard the people of his world whisper, half in fear and half in hope. The Night Haunter, with the fearful name they gave him, an avenging spirit, an angel of blind justice, a murderer other murderers feared. Within the year, the crime rate of Nostramo Quintus fell to near zero. Curze killed and mutilated until the streets fell quiet, and his name was no longer a prayer for justice, but a plea of the fearful. An entire world had been cowed by sheer terror. When the city slept in silence, he went before the aristocracy of sin and gave them a choice: kneel and follow his law, or be destroyed. Some never left that first council, the rest knelt before their master. Nostramo belonged to the Night Haunter. He would be the first king, the Dark King, and became the first absolute monarch Nostramo had ever known. Curze foresaw the coming of his father, the Emperor of mankind, for he knew all things. The answers came to him as they always did, in his dreams. Now master of his world, he found his transhuman senses sharpening beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. He knew on some voiceless level he was becoming something, ripening, maturing into whatever he was born to be. The Dark King undoubtedly possessed great authority and was able to command unquestioning respect. He had molded his society into a model of productivity, natural conformity, and total obedience. A short time into the reign of the Night Haunter as Nostramo's benevolent dictator, the Emperor's Great Crusade finally reached the outskirts of the Nostraman star system. The Emperor landed on Nostramo and led an imperial delegation to the center of Nostramo Quintus on foot. The citizens of Nostramo, adapted to the near-constant darkness, could not bear to look upon the sheer radiance of the Emperor. Giants led them, giants towering above their warriors, just as the warriors towered above mortal men. Leading the giants was a son incarnated in human skin, a god in a man's flesh, his soul fire uncontainable in a sheath of flesh and bone. The army of strangers seized as one, every single one of the 250,000 soldiers standing motionless in the same moment. The four giants stepped forwards. The blazing god led them, the first demigod, clad in wrought gold, inclined his white-haired head in majestic acknowledgement, a king greeting an equal. He introduced himself as Rogal Dorn. The Night Haunter said nothing, but in his mind's eye he saw the giant die, dragged down by 100 murderers in a dark tunnel, their knives and swords wet with the warrior's blood. The second giant wore armor of patterned grey, etched with 10,000 words, as if a scholar had taken a quill to a stone. He nodded his shaven tattooed head, likewise inked with scripture, the lettering gold upon the tanned skin. He introduced himself as Lorgar Aurelian, his voice a hymn, where Dawn's had been a measured stately demand. There was sorrow in his otherwise kind eyes, sorrow at the dark city, its unhealthy people, the obviousness of their colorless exhausting lives. Again, the Night Haunter said nothing. He saw this warrior crowned in psychic fire, screaming up at a burning sky. The third giant wore armor of riveted dense black. His arms were solid silver, yet contoured and moving as living limbs. His voice was the steely grind of a foundry's bowels. He introduced himself as Ferrus Manus. His eyes were dark, but not cold. The Night Haunter remained silent, seeing within his mind an image of the future in which this warrior's head was clutched by its empty eye sockets in another man's armored fingers. The last giant wore armor painted the violet of an alien sunset. His hair was silvery, long and elegant. He alone smiled, and he alone met the Night Haunter's eyes with warmth in his own. He introduced himself as Fulgrim. The Night Haunter still said nothing. In the future that played out over and over, he saw this final giant in only the faintest of images, always slithering and laughing, never entirely visible. At last, the golden god himself stepped forwards, his arms wide open. He drew to speak, but as he did, Curze succumbed to a vision so potent and horrifying that he went to his knees and tried to claw his own eyes out, but was stopped by the Emperor. He felt a hand upon his head. The excruciating pain died in a pulse, restoring his sanity in a moment of mercy. The Night Haunter then looked up to see the golden god, faceless and ageless, resolve into the image of a man. The following words were recorded for posterity by those who witnessed this fateful meeting and still echo with terrible import across the gulf of time. Be at peace, Konrad Curze. I have arrived, and I intend to take you home. That is not my name, father. My people gave me a name, and I will bear it until my dying day, and I know full well what you intend for me. Curze submitted to the Emperor's will as if he had already seen it, as if he was playing out a part he had long feared would fall to him. From that moment on, the fate of the 8th Legion was set on a path of oblivion. Alright guys, thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay tuned for more.